I'll get a kiss, Kazi.
O tēnā tātou, he mihi nunu ki a koutou, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou mō tēnei hui. Ko Tina Porou tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Tūwhare Toa, Ngai tā manuhiri, Ngāti Rā Kaipāka, he mihi mahana ki a koutou katoa. I was thinking today this is probably one of the lowest points to talk about governance for me because, things have been pretty rough for the last 6 months, particularly for our taiao. But I always love the opportunity to come and talk about these kaupapa, particularly at a space like this, because governance is seen as such an important part of how we do things in Māoridom. And sometimes we forget that they were all made up by Pākehā. We've adopted these governance regimes as if they were actual Māori leadership roles, as if mana comes from whether you're the chair or the deputy chair, whether you can chair a meeting or get the minutes. That has become such an entrenched part of who we are as Māori these days. We're starting to make out that that's actually who we are. And so I was reflecting on that because it's been a long time for many of us in the governance space. And I was trying to think now, when was the first time I ever became a so-called governor? And it was when I was 16 and I was the secretary of the Tūrangi Netball Association. Whoop whoop to my auntie Lana, who was the coach. Because that's how early it's become ingrained in us that we have to know how to chair a meeting, take the minutes, be the secretary, be the treasurer. And so we have started to ascribe a lot of mana to these roles, when in actual fact, some of the things that we need does not come from governance. And I personally have found it really difficult to reconcile governance as a leadership style. And as I have looked back over the kind of last few years of my life in this space, working primarily with iwi, I'm a raging hapuist, and so I tend to focus exclusively on my hapu. But as a result, you do get pushed into these roles, and suddenly that's what your target becomes. It certainly was for me as a young person, I want to be on the Tūwhare Toa Māori Trust Board. I want to be on the Ngāti Porou Whānui Forest, because then I would have a role and I would have influence. And then realising that some of those roles actually equated to the least influence of my entire life, and that I had become a slave to this structure under the Māori Land Court. And I genuinely have spent, so many years of my life participating in this space. But what I would say, I think, fundamentally around that is that when you're in Māori governance, you essentially age in dog years. You wouldn't believe it, but I'm actually 20. I'm actually 20, and look what happens to you. But, because you go in really early, you have to be with you're lucky to be with your papas if you are. And when we talked about, Māori governance as a whole and people asking, what would succession look like, I think for the younger people watching this, you have about 5,000% more engagement on succession than I ever did. And I think, I'm reflecting on the title of my speech, which in typical Tina Porou style, totally dramatic, forged in the fire. My cousin reminded me, if it's burning, you should go to a doctor. But I have to say that fire thing is really real. And I heard Meripika earlier today, always great to listen to her talk. And yes, you have to harden up to be in this game. And one of my aunties said to me when I first got in governance, we don't cry, and if we do, it's in the toilets. And it really helped me. Nothing teaches you governance more. And this is I think of this story a lot sometimes. I had put my name up for a trustee on our PSG at my hapu. And I was in the kitchen actually cooking the dinner for the whānau who were voting. And I was in the kitchen, and then my mum comes in running and she goes, "You didn't get voted on." And I was like, "But I'm cooking their kai." She goes, "You got to finish the kai and then leave," because it was really stressful. And I remember thinking, this is the multiplicity of Māori roles. You can get voted out in the front and still have to cook everyone's kai by the afternoon. But nothing prepares you and builds resilience more than that. And that's what I was trying to say about the fire. Because I think one of the things we're forgetting around succession planning is that you have to learn this stuff on the job. And you can do all these courses, and I am part of that. You know, I'm really keen to make sure that we're encouraging rangatahi to participate in leadership, not necessarily governance. And so one of the things, you know, I've seen in the past around succession is that we're really just replacing people like me with a younger version of me. We are not transforming the system at any level. And in fact, as a director who has probably some different ideas than others, I have found myself gaslit quite a lot around trying to describe transformative change in our boards. In fact, to the extent where I say things like, you know, there's a cyclone. One of the reasons I was concerned about talking today, because as I said, this is one of the most difficult periods for myself as a director in my whole career as a director from the time I was 20. We had a cyclone, and in my one of my trusts, we lost 4,000 hectares of pine trees in 3 hours. Now that is not anywhere near as bad as the loss of life and our whānau who have lost their homes on the East Coast. But what it meant practically for me is that I had to tell my cousins, my uncles, my brothers, my sisters that they weren't able to work anymore at home. I had to have my daughter come in and say, hey, auntie, you know, my cousin, my nephew, is having to move to Australia because we lost all the jobs in the forest. Now, this has been really, really difficult for me, and I think it goes to the heart of leadership in comparison to governance. I have gone home every week for the last 8 weeks to front up, and it doesn't matter how many times I explain it in the most articulate way I can, I'm still telling people that they no longer have a job in their own home. And I think that's one of the issues around trying to create succession programs for our kids, because nothing prepares you for the obligation and the responsibility of trying to help our communities, in communities where these things are beyond life and death. They are the difference between putting kai on your table and not. Now, I'm really privileged in that the organisations I've been a trustee on have been largely successful financially and economically over the years. But during a cyclone, what I did see is that there is still a failure to transform. Even in the face of a cyclone, and I'm from the East Coast as well as Te Wharetoa, people are still trying to economic development their way out of this. They are still trying to balance sheet their way out of this. They are still trying to find the accountants and the financial analysis and all of the capitalist models to get ourselves out of what is the most significant environmental damage of our generational lifetime. Climate change and the impact on te mano te wai, our waters, they are far more important than whether or not I can give a dividend to one of my 12,000 owners, to be fair, which ends up about $20. And this constant narrative that we have been fed recently about economic development from the government at the moment, that Māori economic development is the answer, I can assure you it is not. And if we continue to take a Western capitalist model and frame it on whenua that was designed and given to us through our DNA, we will fail. I am challenged every day by people who keep saying to me, oh, but Tina, you're not a financial, anything, you're a geographer. Or, oh, you're not a lawyer, although I think I am half the time. Ask my cousins, my lawyer cousins, Maya and Horiana, they will tell you I think I am too. But I am constantly questioned about why I think that we should not continue into this specific industries that are so vulnerable to climate change. Every Māori economic development conference you'll go to, we are overrepresented in the agribusiness sector. and we continuously invest in that. We continuously participate. And then when it all collapses like that, we say, oh, we didn't actually have a financial strategy well enough to deal with it. No, we chose to take a colonial path. In the same way that forestry and farming was brought over here on a ship, like possums and all the other colonial rubbish that actually destroyed our country, we have adopted those things and said that they were our own. Instead of transitioning into taiao-centred economies, which will require us to do some things. One of the things it requires us to do is to have you got to be a better uri. This is not entirely about governance. This is about uri. And so when we are trying to transform ourselves out of these extractive economies and into taiao-centred economies, and we go to AGMs and our owners say, oh yes, you must be kaitaki, but I want my 20 cent per share. We've got to look back on ourselves too. Because as you all probably know, those of us in trusts and corporations, we are required to be Māori Jesus. You got to walk on water and do it in te reo Māori. These are the real kind of pressures that we have as trustees. And I have recently seen some of my closest cousins crack under that pressure. And I saw them crack in a way that I never thought I would. And I am worried because our people on the ground have high expectations of us, but at what point are we putting expectations on them? And we're seeing a greater disconnect through our demographics. We know that our trusts and corporations and this is, everybody knows this in trusts and corporations, that, we're getting a younger group, we're getting more ownership spread across different people who have never even seen their whenua, and all they're expecting is a dividend, and those fundamental expectations around looking after our taiao are being lessened because they want the pūtea. And so then we're voting on people who we think will get them pūtea instead of those who will actually move us away and get us ready for the next millennia, where we will not be depending on extractive resources and extractive businesses to feed our families anymore. And we saw that in a cyclone, and it's still difficult. I still get gaslit on my boards about whether or not what I can offer is real or pragmatic. We are past that. We are actually past the point where we can go, oh, but will we give our owners that dividend? Or, Tina, you don't understand, we've got to create a business. We are at the point now of environmental collapse. And I know Willie Te Aho calls me hinenui te pō. He tries to make that out a bad thing, but hinenui te pō, that is a total compliment. But I'm going to pull it back because I feel like I'm going spiralling. Pulling it back in the last kind of round. What I would say is that our rangatahi are ready for this different way of doing business. We're part of a program called Te Hira Puao, and it was a drive for us to be able to say, if we were to create the new economy, if we were to create a new workforce around taiao-centred economies, what would we need to do? And so in Rotorua last year in March, we put out the tono and 300 rangatahi turned up. All taiao practitioners. And I always think the best indicator of a great taiao wānanga is how many hivers are in the room. And it was just orange everywhere. It was fabulous. But what I did also see at Te Hira Puao was this. The way in which those rangatahi understood the environment through the medium of te reo Māori was unique. They didn't have the language trauma, and they were sliding from English to Māori. There were some koutu ones, there are other languages there too. But the ability to see the world dynamically through a first language of te reo Māori meant that their connection to te ao was far more intimate than I had ever seen in my own generation. And so that doesn't mean they have all the answers. And I do really strongly believe in the ability of ourselves to pull together tuakana teina models. They cannot do it by themselves. I saw this, and I'm sure you all saw it recently too, the term the co-mafia. And I love that. I love the co-mafia. I think about when I was very young and working in the Tūwharetua Māori Trust Board, you know, my uncle Jim Biddle, who was an amazing governor, because he would bring everybody back to Rangi Māori, even if we were scrapping. My uncle Rangi Downs, who was an academic and could, you know, recite every piece of whakapapa from every piece of land that we were looking after for our people. And then I was also taught by Whaimatu Jews who, you know, went to the big schools in the States and was able to bring that back to, you know, our own whānau in Ruatoria and teach people like me. I think just as we consider what governance looks and feels like for us going forward, with this new range of rangatahi with different skills, I think the best and most important lesson we have to learn is to break things, not to tinker. I'm hoping that the next generation do what Uncle Tāmati really tried to do, which was to stop succession in the Māori Land Court and to create, transform something entirely new over how we would look after our whenua for our hapu. Because it has caused so much damage in that, and we've forgotten that the Māori Land Court was a construct of the colonial powers to divide us from our lands, and we have become its greatest hero. So, given that, I think I'm getting the nod from the cousin. But I just finished by saying I super appreciate the chance to come and talk to you all today. I was at a real low as I came in. I'm sure we're all having māwiwi and struggling, you know, to manage through crisis. But I think what I learnt here today and the people I've seen over the last couple of hours is how genuinely connected to our whenua and our people we are. If we can maintain that, then this government will just be another mosquito to swat away. So, kia ora koutou.
That's it. Fun. Too much.